Good luck.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lat Mackey, and this is Sequence Break, a podcast that features conversations with speedrunners, developers, content creators, and everything in between. Thank you so much for watching and listening and enjoying for today. This is episode 61, and I'm going to fly solo on this one again. So if it's terrible, you can purely just blame me. It's all my fault. I'm totally down with that, and I understand if this is the last podcast episode you ever listen to. I am calling this episode What to Speedrun Next. And I've kind of been thinking about this topic really since I started the podcast. And it's one of those things that I always like to talk to other speedrunners about, but also consider myself quite often when I am speedrunning or thinking about what to speedrun next, or what, do I want to dedicate and devote all this time to the next speedrun? Because it's kind of it's an interesting question that I think many of us have grasped with, or at some point have considered. Even if you're a person who really only speedruns maybe one or two games, this is still something I bet you wrestle with as well. Because if you really play one game, when do you call it quits? When do you take it? When do you take a break from it, and all those kind of things? And I think that that's an important question to kind of take up. And so I'm going to try to take a deep dive in here. So when I first started speedrunning, the first game that I ever really attempted to play like as fast as I could was Zelda 2. And I didn't have an NES. I had some emulators on my computer, but I didn't have a lot of time to just sit down on my computer. I was on the go a lot. So the first game that I tried starting to speedrun was Zelda 2 on my Nintendo 3DS, of all things. And if you've ever used those controls, my respect level for 3DS and DS and DSi and all of the speedrunners of the portable generations goes through the roof because of how small the controls are and things like that. And so I was trying to learn Zelda 2, my approach was just to see if I could get the strats through Palace 1, which I know is what kind of goal is that? I didn't know anything better. I didn't even really know the categories at that time. I had seen some GDQs and things like that, and I'd seen other people speedrunning, ProJN really specifically in the Zelda 2 arena, and then, who else would it was? Many others of that time period, probably Feasel and Eon, and I was trying to figure out, like, man, how can I get this controller to work for me? So after about I probably only gave it a week, which was probably not enough time. I was running into a wall. I wasn't being able to do the things that I was hoping I'd be able to do after I'd, of course, seen the best in the world. I wanted to do it right away, right? So I got a little discouraged. And that's when I started picking up Super Mario Bros. 3, because I had seen Mitch run it and many others. And I was thinking, like, man, it just looks fun if I could learn those strats. Zelda 2 looked the same way, but I've always looked at Zelda 2 as like this really hard game. Super Mario Bros. 3 was a game I could beat as a kid, and I felt like it was just a bit more approachable. So when I started playing through Super Mario Bros. 3, I was like, after I'd gotten some times that I was somewhat happy with, they were, I don't know, I'm probably 100 something. I don't even know what place I am nowadays. It's been so long. It's been at least 3 or 4 years since I've grinded the game. And I'd started thinking that, man, I could try out some other games. And it wasn't really like a conscious decision or anything. It was just, I wanted to start playing through some other games. And as I started playing through them, I'm like, hey, maybe these games can be speedrun. And in my case, obviously it's the TurboGrafx 16, it's Bonk, it's some other games and things like that. And I realized, man, it's something that I could just start. Why don't I find my next speed games by the games that I casually play through? And that's kind of been my approach. There are still speedruns out there that I see nowadays where I'm like, man, I would like to learn that because it looks way fun. The only issue with that is that there's so many games out there that look like they're so much fun. And so, especially as somebody like myself who really enjoys a variety of games, like just having this huge funnel of games to choose from actually gets to be a little bit challenging. So how do you narrow it down and things like that? Well, the simple answer is just pick one and go, because there's always going to be, I've finally come to accept, and I've accepted this with literature and movies and television shows and basically all forms of art, that there are just some things that I'm not going to get to in this lifetime. And it's a real bummer to kind of admit that. But once you do, for me, it was a bit freeing. You know what? Okay, I'm not going to get a chance to play all the games that I want. So as I started playing through, like I said, mostly of the Bonk games were at first, but then as I started branching out from there, I just oh man, this game is fun. And it seems like it might be kind of fun to actually play through as a speedrun. Others have kind of looked, another totally valid like approach that I think is out there is also checking out the leaderboard. What have others done? Is there a community around this? There is something very fulfilling and rewarding about grinding a game out for yourself and being the person who finds these strats and who spends times with the game. There are many examples of that in our speedrunning community. One of the ones that always comes to my mind first is Le Hulk, and I got to get him on the podcast at some point if he's interested at all, because he's the type of person that really optimizes, breaks down a game, really speedruns it to a certain quality and level that is of a high bar. And sometimes there's like a no community around some of the games that he runs, which is, that's not always easy to do. It's not always easy to go find these things without anybody out there. The other aspect of it is maybe you want something, I know there are hundreds of people. Let's say Super Mario 64. There are literally thousands of submissions for Mario 64, which is, yes, if you're the type of person that wants to, be the best at something and be competitive, that may be a little bit discouraging thing. But if you look at the Mario 64 speedrun, it looks really fun. And it may be something that you enjoy doing. And therefore you have this community that be out there and willing to, help you out and learn these new things, or at very least there are resources out there for you, YouTube, all these other kind of things, which is probably things you already know about. But I think it's interesting to know that there are all these different approaches that can totally work and totally be viable. And it's just really what finds and connects with you. So I've started asking this question of myself, and what am I looking for in a speedrun? And I wish there was like a formula that I could come up with that was like, oh yes, this is a speedrun. But the most recent thing that I've bumped into is Return to Subcon, which is a Super Mario Bros. 2 US ROM hack. And it doesn't have a lot of runners on it. And that has nothing really to do with it. It has to do with, I've really enjoyed the time that I've spent with it. And I know one of the things that I've really been aware of is that as I play through a game casually or for the first time, I'm noticing by the last level, which is by design, that my skills are improving quite a bit in nearly every game. And to me, it's almost like I don't want to waste that time and that skill that I've put into the game. So the way that I feel like I can get more out of that is by speedrunning the game or by doing it over again. So Return to Subcon has been a game that I'd like to speedrun next. I don't actually know if it'll actually happen, but it's something I've definitely been considering. But this came up, time and time again of games that I played through casually first, and I'm like, man, this would actually work. Fushigi no Yumi no Alice is one of them. Legend of Hero Tonma sort of was like that. I wasn't quite sure about that one, but I was like, man, this is a game that I think I could put some more time into. Bonk 3 was definitely one of those. The first time I played through it, I was like, I'm not sure how much I enjoyed it and everything like that. But the more that I played with it, I'm like, hey, you know what? This speedrun isn't the worst thing in the world. It's not the best thing in the world either, but we'll just, put that out there. And then another one most definitely is Golf Daisuke OB Club, which is a game on the Satellaview for the Super Famicom that Epic Neon Ninja Monkey turned me on to. It's a golf game, but it's kind of like a mini putt-putt golf type of game. Really fun. But the more I started playing, I'm like, man, this would be really cool and really interesting to speedrun. So I guess what I'm looking for, or what ends up pushing me into the edge or pushing me into the actual, hey, let's go speedrun this, is like what I'm feeling towards the end of a first playthrough, which kind of leads into the next part, which is how do I go about, or how do you go about, or how should we consider going about learning a speedrun? And that has been one of the things that I've enjoyed the most out of this podcast, is hearing different runners with their process. I can remember back to the Enemy episode where he was cautious or a little bit hesitant to play a game over and over and over again to completion, because he brings up a really good point where, you can develop bad habits pretty easily, and bad habits can be tough to break, or at least muscle memory. I shouldn't say maybe necessarily bad habits, but definitely some muscle memory thing. And I can totally vouch for that. And as a person who has run into those things and still struggles with some of those things in his speedrunning, absolutely relate to that. On the flip side of it, one of the things I really enjoy about speedrunning is getting to play the game over and over again. Like, I don't speedrun games that I don't enjoy, except for maybe Bonk 3, which is on the borderline for me. So like the actual process of completing a game is really interesting and really fun to me. And I've noticed that I get better over time by playing the game over and over again. It also happens, this is like the secondary benefit, where if you are a person who likes to do these in marathons, or maybe you like to race and things like that, playing the game over and over again puts you in situations that you kind of always know how to get out of something because you've kind of been through everything. It never fails. It just happened to me. I just did Feed the Kids for Retro RGL over the weekend, and I had something happen in Airzonk, and I've played the game, I don't know, over 100 times now. I've completed the game, and something happened that's never happened before. That it's one of those things where I just think it's like, of course it's a marathon, something wild's going to happen, and that actually does. But the nice thing is, and at that point, is that I've played through the game so many times that I am aware and comfortable with making some on-the-fly adjustments. I kind of subscribe to the philosophy that if you're like 2 hours into a game and you're not enjoying it, unless there's something that seems like there might be some more potential on your path or on your journey through the game, I think it's okay to step away. The one thing that's great about gaming is that we all have our own approaches, and what works for you may not work for other people. I've noticed I've struggled with this, and for those that my stream or anything like that, Pokemon has been, I really enjoyed my Crystal playthrough. It was one of the most fun playthroughs I've had, but I've struggled a little bit with Emerald, and I'm not sure what about that game has not clicked with me or has not, connected. But it's one of those things where it's like, I think it's okay if it's not connecting with you to put it down for a while or maybe walk away, especially being that for many of us, our gaming time is limited. I almost think of it like a sacred thing where I don't get a lot of time to play games. Even if you're a full-time streamer, a lot of your gaming time is on stream. And let's say you're speedrunning a certain game, or you have playthroughs that you want to do on stream and stuff like that. It's interesting because your gaming time is actually still limited, just like all of us with day jobs and things like that, or responsibilities outside of streaming. So I guess what I'm trying to get to, maybe I'm even talking to myself. Maybe I'm just trying to assure myself here that it's okay to take a break or to, admit that this game may not be for you. Now, I do like to trust my friends or people in the community and things like other speedrunners in that if I'm told, hey, if you wait 5 hours from now, or if you wait, a couple more levels, this thing is really going to pop. That's something that you have to consider for yourself as well. And I think that's one of the nice things and one of the great things about being a part of community. Also, having friends, who, hopefully won't steer you wrong, type of thing. So interesting to note, and always, I think, a good question to ask at some point during your playthrough or during your speed runs. So this is something that has come up a bit. It just came up. So if you're listening to this around early December, late November in 2021, like clockwork, the issue of turbo has come up in the speedrunning community. And for real, I'm pretty sure this conversation comes up once a year. I'm not sure if it's around this time period every year, but it seems like it does. And if you want to step away from that conversation for a moment and just get to kind of the heart of it and what is considered a speedrun, and many speedrunners have already made this argument on Twitter, but it's definitely something that I subscribe to. And that is, a speedrun is whatever you make it to be or whatever you want it to be. And I think that's the great thing, once again, about gaming, but also about speedrunning itself, is that however you enjoy the game is the way that you should play it. We have these competitive leaderboards, and I'm going to put that in air quotes as competitive leaderboards, because all of the leaderboards are community driven, and the community decides what the rules are. The community decides what games, the game modes that you play in. It's all community driven. So if the community decides to adopt, and how do you decide that? Well, sometimes it just has to be a simple majority. Other times, different communities do it differently. But if the community does decide to do something, that doesn't prohibit you from playing the game the way that you want to. The great part I know about, I shouldn't say the great part. One of the good things about speedrunning is the obvious community. You find people who are into the same things that you are. I always talk about TurboGrafx-16 because of the community that I'm a part of. But, there are many of us who enjoy the console and the games on there. So a lot of the rules have been decided based on what we all agreed to. And it's interesting because I don't know if we've ever had had to do like a vote where it came down to 49-51 or anything like that. I'd be interested actually to see and investigate if there have been things like there have to have been, right? Where there've been some close calls in different communities. My point being here is that you should speedrun the way that you want to speedrun. And if you do that, you will find it way more fulfilling than trying to fulfill something that isn't true to yourself. And if you think that something should be changed in the community, or if you have something that you want to express, jump into the Discord. Start participating in the communities. I know at first that can be really intimidating and really challenging, especially for those of us that are more introverted. Like just that simple process of actually communicating and typing out those first few messages can be really kind of scary. I can tell you that my experience has been when I've participated in different communities, I have been much more engaged in what I'm doing and also surprised by the people that I get to meet and talk through that. When I was putting together the Super Metroid episode for GDQ, I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was when I jumped into the Super Metroid Discord. All of the top runners, all of the people who do this full time, all of the people who do it at the highest level, were all there in the Discord, talking about strats, talking about the community, talking about races, things like that, as well as people who were just getting into the speedrun. And once again, I know it can be intimidating, but I think it's something that if that's what you're looking for, it's there and you can participate. That's one of the great things about speedrunning. This may seem like a common sense thing, but I know that I still make this mistake even after I've done my first couple runs of a new speedrun. And that is check the damn rules. They can change sometimes, but I had a thing happen during my Rondo of Blood runs, and that I had a run rejected. And it's one of the first times I'd ever had a run rejected. And that is because they were not accepting the English patch of the run. And that made sense to me. They wanted to keep it as close to the original as we could, they wanted to keep it as all licensed runs of the game. So the virtual console, there is emulation allowed, but then also, the English patch would substitute an altered ROM, an altered original ROM. And see, made perfect sense to me, but it was my fault because I hadn't read the rules first. And I think just a friendly reminder is always a good thing in this case when you're considering your next speedrun. One of the things that I almost always ask a guest who is a speedrunner, and that is how to avoid burnout. And isn't that the $1 million question? It's one of those things where by nature, we're doing this thing over and over and over again. And it can, depending on where you are, some people never get burned out, which blows my mind that even happens. But I know for me, I have struggled with this at times. The nice thing is that one of the ways that I limit this quite easily is that I rarely stream for more than 2 or 3 hours. And I got to tell you, the people at the highest level I've seen work the same way. Zallard 1 is a great example of this, where you're talking about one of the greatest speedrunners in Punch-Out, in Splatterhouse, all different versions of Splatterhouse, and Star Fox. And he streams, I rarely see Zallard when he streams more than 3 hours or so. And I think that's a really good example, or a great way to highlight that one of the ways you could avoid burnout is just by limiting your sessions at first. That may not work for everyone. Maybe, I know some people love to sit there, and I know whenever I'm playing a Zelda game, I can easily go 8 hours, 10 hours. If I had the time for it, I totally would. So I've gotten older, it's been a little more challenging now than that. Adidas, absolutely, Zallard has top tier skills. But one of the things that speedrunning rewards and is great is dedication and really spending the time on a game. And so finding different ways to break up the time may be a good solution for you. Obviously, the other one is if you've been grinding a game for months or weeks or whatever it may be, put it down for a little bit. I tend to think of the people who've been on the podcast or those that I've chatted with. So Mitch is another great one, Mitch Flower Power, where he has to take breaks because of, at some point, Super Mario Bros. 3 just destroys his hands. Other times, I don't know for sure, but I know I've heard him discuss being burned out on the game as well at times. And you take a break and you come back, you're fresh and you're ready to take on a new category, try some new things, set another world record, beat your previous PB, all those things that go to, really enhancing your speedrunning as far as the quality, but also the experience you have with it as you're getting through. I think perhaps maybe one of the most important ways to avoid burnout is to play a game you love. I have heard, and this is anecdotal, of course, those who speedrun games that they no longer enjoy or that they don't enjoy the way that they used to. And my heart breaks for that, honestly, because there's a reason you chose that game in the first place. And I think, that if you're playing a game you love or a game that at least you enjoy, you're going to get a lot more out of the speedrun. Whether that's competitively or whether that's performance-wise, maybe just, beating your own PBs and things like that. But also the fact that you have to reset this thing a ton of times. So it damn well better be a game you enjoy at very least, right? And I think that's perhaps one of the biggest reasons that I have continued to play a lot of the games that I play. And just recently, put them in some marathons for charities and stuff like that. I'm still very fortunate enough to help out and do. And I'm looking at my list of games that I've played, and I have enjoyed every single one of these, minus Bonk 3, over and over and over again. Like I popped in Airzonk. I hadn't played Airzonk in a couple months. It felt almost as good as some of the first times playing it. Some of that may have to do with some nostalgia, but I think it's still something that I just, the game, if you find a game you enjoy, you really want to, I think that's a really important point for the speedrun of itself. Speedrun.com is our place where we have decided to submit all of our data and our runs and links to our runs and all of that kind of stuff. I don't know how long ago it was as of this recording, but a time ago, ELO purchased the website from, I don't remember who owned it before then, and has changed it quite a bit. Previous to ELO's purchase, my experience on the site was usually struggling with load times on almost any leaderboard that I visited. And it lacked features that I think would, for what I do, would make it a bit more accessible and usable. And a lot of that has to do with filtering out historical data and filtering in a way that would, well, to be to filter out a way that would help me do research for the various podcasts but also the runs that I'm interested in. And some of those features have been added in over time, not all of them, but the ease at which to show some obsoleted runs has improved over the time. And my experience has been since their purchase that the site does load quicker. And I've noticed that it's more responsive in that manner. I have also noticed a huge increase in the amount of ads. And I know probably, especially if you're listening to this podcast, there's a good chance you have ad blockers on, so you don't even notice the ads that are there. I was a donor to the previous speedrun.com incarnation before it was purchased by the new group. And I haven't donated since. And yeah, I'm not even seeing a button to donate actually anymore on the site. So I don't even know if that functionality still exists. I think the point that I'm trying to make is that if we as communities want things to be different on there, we have I know that's a good point, Emily. This should be the next podcast. If we want our leaderboards or our place where we contribute our data to, it's upon us to take ownership of that. And I know that's not an easy thing to do, but the Mega Man community is a great example of a community that wants their leaderboards to be a certain way with certain things. And I know not everyone in the Mega Man community agrees that their sites are the best way of doing this. My point being is that they are a community who has taken this upon themselves to do something different. And it's not easy. Super Metroid's a great example. There's thousands. I think there's over 10,000 runs that have been submitted for Super Metroid. Maybe it's like 9,000. And moving that data would not be a trivial or easy thing to do. Absolutely not. But we are living in a world nowadays where it is becoming more accessible to collaborate and place data in a place that we have the opportunity to be more in control of. And I know quite often that comes with a cost. And that is not something that is easy or is trivial to do. But I think it's important. I'd like to start this conversation that, do you think the reason I say start this conversation, because I want to hear from others, and I'm going to ask more people as I go through the podcast about some of these things. What's a better solution? As I've gotten older, I'm getting closer to 40 now, and I'm the type of person that if I see a problem, I really want to get my hands dirty, get involved, and try to solve that problem from the inside out. That's not an easy thing to do, and it's usually really challenging for just one person to do. But Emily brings up a great point in the chat, to build a runner-owned hosting site. Yes. And okay, yeah, one person, it would be tough for me to go bootstrap that thing by myself. Let me drop, however much thousands of dollars I'm going to need to hire developers, to hire data folks who can get in the data and deal with it correctly. Hosting, all those kind of things for one person would be obviously could be a real problem. But if one by one we start joining this thing, and okay, let's say I'm fortunate, I have a day job, I can kick in $100. Another person, is perhaps a younger person who hasn't entered in the workforce yet, they can kick in $5. Or maybe they can kick in their time, or maybe they can kick in their volunteer, development skills and all those kind of things. You'd be surprised what our community can do. Maybe you wouldn't be surprised. GDQ still raises $2 million, at an event. So these things aren't out of our reach if it's something that we think needs to be done. So with all of that being said, I'd like to start this conversation because it's already happening on social media and other places, Discord, things like that. And I think it's something that we need to take seriously and also consider what our future looks like. What happens if speedrun.com gets shut down? There are many different things that could lead to that. What happens if ELO goes bankrupt? What happens to the site then? Do we just lose it? What if they stop paying their AWS bills or whoever is hosting them? These are real questions that hopefully we as a community could solve, or at least to find a way that suits us better than if we have issues with the current way that things are going. I could, yes. So as Emily mentioned, I also could just make this a shit on SRC podcast, but I don't know I think it's great to point out the flaws with something. I also think that it can be just as constructive to consider what we could do if we all work together. So folks, thanks so much for listening and watching through some of this. It's not a rant. It's just some of the questions that I've been wrestling with and struggling with myself as a speedrunner. And I was just looking over my submissions on speedrun.com, speaking of, and I haven't submitted a PB in 6 months. And the real truth of that is that I haven't speedrun that much in 6 months. And part of that has been, I would like to try something new. And I've just not sat down and said, hey, I'm going to do this. And at the end of the day, that can be a thing. And I'm hoping by talking some of these questions out, it perhaps sheds some light for your own speedrunning. And I can tell you that I'm hoping it's most definitely going to help mine. I'm casually playing through Super Castlevania 4 right now, which I've never played through before. And I'm still really enjoying that experience of playing through a game for the first time. At the same time, all I can think about is Return to Subcon. Like when I've thought about games I want to just play until my fingers hurt, that is the game that I really want to dedicate some time to. And it's, I haven't played a Mario game like that since 2017 was my last submitted Super Mario Brothers 3 run. So it's taking a little bit of getting used to in that sense. But then again, I haven't been streaming or speedrunning or gaming at all that much because of, day job and day life responsibilities. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed, and perhaps you consider some of these questions yourself. As I mentioned, I want to keep this conversation going with the future guests who are on the show. But if you'd like to chime in and maybe sound off, if you will, come join the Discord. There is a Lat Mackey Discord right now. Sequence Break doesn't have its own dedicated thing yet. And thankfully, the community hasn't gotten big enough where I've needed that. So, but if you do want to come and ask questions or perhaps want to continue this conversation, join us. It'll be fun. Maybe it won't be fun. I don't know. It'll be something. There'll be some letters in there. We can type about it. I don't know. I promise you we'll be welcoming and accommodating for any new folks who want to join. So, as I tend to say in almost all of these, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I will talk with you in the next one.